Adrian Whitmore had spent years building an empire where fear was stronger than loyalty and silence was more valuable than trust. In the underground world of New York, his name carried a weight that made powerful men think twice before challenging him. He was known as a strategist who could predict betrayal before it happened, a man who never allowed emotions to interfere with business. But behind the walls of his luxury corporate headquarters, Adrian lived a life surrounded by success yet completely untouched by happiness. The marble floors, expensive offices, and endless security represented everything he had achieved, but none of it could fill the emptiness that followed him after every long night. His employees admired his intelligence, but feared his presence. To them, Adrian Whitmore was not just a businessman. He was a man who controlled situations before they became problems. Almost everyone inside his company kept their distance, except Claire Morgan. Claire was Adrian's personal secretary, a woman who had worked beside him for years without ever demanding attention. She was organized, calm, and professional. She handled impossible schedules, difficult clients, and stressful situations without showing weakness. Most people saw her as someone ordinary. Adrian saw something different. He noticed the way Claire always arrived early and left late. He noticed how she carried invisible burdens, but never allowed them to affect her work. She had a strength that did not come from power or influence, and for a man who trusted almost no one, that quiet strength had always caught his attention. One night, after handling a dangerous situation involving his rivals, Adrian returned to his headquarters long after midnight. He expected the building to be completely empty. Instead, one office light was still glowing. At first, he assumed someone had made a mistake, but as he walked through the silent hallway, he realized the light was coming from Claire's office. The sight, waiting inside, stopped him. Claire was sitting alone at her desk, holding an old photograph in her hands. The woman who always appeared composed was silently breaking apart. Tears rolled down her face as she stared at the image, like it carried a memory she had spent years trying to escape. Adrian had seen people beg for their lives. He had watched enemies collapse under pressure. He had witnessed fear in its purest form. But seeing Claire cry felt different. It was the first time he realized that the calm woman beside him was carrying a pain far deeper than he ever imagined. As Adrian looked closer, something about the photograph caught his attention. A figure standing beside Claire in the picture looked strangely familiar. The past he thought was buried forever had suddenly appeared inside his own office. For the first time in years, Adrian Whitmore was not searching for an enemy. He was searching for the truth. And when his eyes finally recognized the person standing beside Claire in the photograph, he realized she was connected to someone he believed had vanished from his life forever. The photograph in Claire Morgan's hand changed the way Adrian Whitmore looked at the woman who had worked beside him for years. Until that night, Claire had been nothing more than a reliable secretary who kept his world organized. She managed his meetings, protected his schedule, and handled pressure with a calmness that impressed even a man like Adrian. But Adrian had learned one rule in his dangerous world. People who hide the most are usually protecting the biggest secrets. The next morning, while Claire returned to her normal duties as if nothing had happened, Adrian began searching for answers. He did not confront her. He investigated. That was how Adrian survived. His instincts had kept him alive through betrayals, attacks, and alliances built on lies. He knew that every person had a story, but some stories were buried because someone powerful wanted them forgotten. When his private team reviewed Claire's background, the results immediately raised questions. Her records were incomplete. Several years of her life were missing. There were no clear explanations about where she lived, who she knew, or why certain documents had been sealed. It was almost as if someone had carefully removed pieces of her history and left behind only the version of Claire Morgan the world was allowed to see. Adrian understood something important. A person's past did not disappear by accident. Someone made it disappear. The more he learned, the more Claire's quiet personality started making sense. She was not simply a shy woman who avoided attention. She was someone who had learned that being invisible was sometimes the safest way to survive. Claire had grown up surrounded by danger she never asked for. Years earlier, her family had been connected to a powerful criminal organization that controlled parts of the city. Her father had been a respected figure until a betrayal inside the organization destroyed everything they had built. Friends became enemies. Allies disappeared. And a family name that once carried influence became a target. Claire survived by leaving everything behind. She changed her identity, moved far away, and created a simple life where nobody knew who she really was. But memories were harder to escape than enemies. The fear stayed with her. The guilt stayed with her. And the secret stayed buried. Adrian began seeing Claire differently. She was not a fragile employee who needed protection. She was a survivor who had carried years of pain without allowing the world to see it. That realization created a dangerous conflict inside him, because the same past that made him respect her could also destroy everything he had built. The information connected Claire's family history to one of Adrian's oldest rivals. A name appeared repeatedly in the files, a name linked to betrayal, violence, and a war that Adrian's family had barely survived. Keeping Claire close could expose his entire empire, but letting her go could mean losing the only person who had ever been near him without wanting power or money. Then Adrian discovered the final missing piece, the real surname hidden behind Claire Morgan's identity. And when he saw the name written in the confidential file, he realized the woman sitting outside his office every morning was the daughter of the man who once came dangerously close to destroying his family forever. The name inside the confidential file felt heavier than any weapon Adrian Whitmore had ever held. Claire Morgan was not just a secretary with a hidden past. She was Claire Voss, the daughter of Marcus Voss, the man Adrian's family had spent years fighting against. For a moment, Adrian's world became silent. Marcus Voss was not just another rival. He was a man responsible for one of the darkest chapters in Adrian's life. Their conflict had destroyed alliances, ended friendships, and left scars that never fully disappeared. Adrian had spent years believing that the Voss name represented betrayal. It represented loss. It represented everything he had promised himself he would never forgive. His first instinct was simple: remove the threat before it became a problem. That was how Adrian had survived. He never allowed emotions to interfere with decisions. A dangerous connection was still dangerous, even when it came with an innocent face. But then he remembered Claire, the woman who stayed late to finish work nobody thanked her for, the woman who carried pain quietly instead of using it as an excuse, the woman who had spent years running from a family name she never chose. And that created a conflict Adrian had never expected. His enemy's daughter was not his enemy. Claire had never been part of her father's world. She rejected the power, money, and violence that surrounded her childhood. While others fought for control, she wanted only one thing: a normal life where nobody looked at her and saw someone else's mistakes. She had changed her name because she wanted freedom. She had built a career because she wanted independence. And she had hidden her past because she was afraid the truth would make people judge her before knowing who she really was. Adrian understood that fear better than anyone. He had spent his entire life being judged by his reputation instead of his choices. For the first time, he saw a reflection of himself in Claire. Both of them were trapped by names they inherited. Both of them carried wounds created by people before them. But unlike Adrian, Claire had spent years trying to escape the darkness instead of controlling it. The discovery changed everything inside Adrian's empire. He did not expose her. He did not send her away. Instead, he quietly increased security around her without letting her know. Threats that appeared near her apartment disappeared. People asking dangerous questions suddenly stopped asking them. Adrian protected her from the shadows, not because he had forgiven Marcus Voss, not because he had forgotten the past, but because Claire had proven she was not the person he once hated. Their relationship changed slowly. The walls between them did not disappear overnight. Trust had to be earned. Pain had to be understood. And both of them knew that forgiveness was much harder than revenge. But Adrian's biggest mistake was believing that keeping Claire's secret hidden would keep her safe, because someone else had already discovered the truth. Late one night, an anonymous message appeared on Adrian's private phone. Only one sentence was written: "Your secretary isn't who you think she is, and by morning, the entire city will know." Adrian Whitmore had spent his entire life recognizing danger before it arrived. But this time, the threat was already inside his world. The attack happened faster than anyone expected. Claire Morgan was leaving the headquarters after another late night when the quiet street outside suddenly changed. A vehicle appeared where it should not have been. Unknown men moved with the confidence of people who already knew her routine. They were not there to scare her. They were there because they believed Claire was carrying something valuable. Adrian's security team reached her moments before the situation became irreversible, but the message was clear. Someone knew who Claire really was, and someone wanted what she had. When Adrian arrived and saw the fear in Claire's eyes, something inside him changed. For years, he had protected his empire because it represented power. He protected his reputation because weakness could destroy everything. But protecting Claire felt different. She was no longer a hidden risk connected to his enemy. She was a person who had been hunted her entire life because of secrets she never created. Adrian immediately launched an investigation. Every camera, every financial record, every connection from the old Voss organization. Nothing was ignored. The deeper his team searched, the more disturbing the truth became. The attack was not about revenge against Marcus Voss. It was about something Marcus had left behind before his death, a final secret. Years earlier, Marcus had discovered evidence that powerful figures inside the criminal world were working together behind the scenes. He had collected records, financial documents, and proof of illegal deals that could expose people who had spent decades building their influence. He never revealed the information. He disappeared before anyone could find it. But he had hidden one final piece of the puzzle. And somehow, Claire had become the key to finding it. The discovery crushed her. Claire had spent years running from her father's legacy, believing his choices had destroyed her chance at a normal life. Now, because of his secrets, Adrian's empire was being dragged into another war. She started believing the only way to protect him was to leave, but Adrian refused. For the first time, he was not looking at Claire as a connection to his enemy. He was looking at her as someone who had survived a life she never deserved. The same woman who had once walked through his office unnoticed had become the person standing at the center of the biggest threat his empire had faced in years. And Adrian realized something that surprised even him. Some people were worth protecting, not because they were useful, but because losing them would mean losing a part himself. However, while Adrian focused on the enemies outside, another danger was growing closer. Someone inside his organization had been feeding information to the rival forces. Someone knew every move before it happened. Someone had access to secrets only a trusted person could possess. Then Claire discovered a hidden file connected to her father's final investigation. Inside it was a name she never expected to see. The person who destroyed her family years ago was not a stranger. It was someone Adrian Whitmore had trusted with his life. Adrian Whitmore had always believed the most dangerous enemy was the one standing across the battlefield. He was wrong. The person who could destroy everything he built had been standing beside him for years. The investigation into the attack on Claire uncovered a betrayal deeper than Adrian expected. The evidence did not point toward a rival family or an outside organization. It pointed towards someone who had access to every secret inside his empire, someone who knew his movements, someone who knew his weaknesses, someone he trusted. Damian Cross had been Adrian's closest advisor for nearly a decade. He was a man who handled negotiations, managed important connections, and stood beside Adrian during some of the most dangerous moments of his rise. To everyone else, Damian was loyal, a perfect soldier, a brother by choice. But behind that loyalty was a carefully hidden ambition. Damian had never wanted to serve Adrian. He wanted to replace him. For years, he had been creating invisible cracks inside the empire. He manipulated alliances, redirected information, and quietly encouraged conflicts that made Adrian appear weaker. The attack on Claire was not an accident. It was part of a larger plan. Damian believed Claire's connection to Marcus Voss would create enough chaos to remove Adrian from power and allow him to take control of everything Adrian had built. But Damian made one mistake. He underestimated Claire. The woman he considered a weakness became the reason his plan began falling apart. Claire's father's hidden information contained more than evidence against rival criminals. It contained records of Damian's secret movements, financial transfers, and betrayals that stretched back years. For the first time, Adrian and Claire stood on the same side, not as a mafia boss and his secretary, not as the son of one enemy and the daughter of another, but as two people fighting against the same person who wanted to destroy them both. Their partnership changed everything. Adrian began trusting Claire with information he had never shared with anyone outside his inner circle. He realized that control was not the same as strength. Sometimes the strongest decision was allowing someone else to stand beside him. Claire also changed. For years, she believed her family name was a curse she could never escape. But working with Adrian showed her something important. Her father's choices were not her identity. Her past was not her future. She was not the daughter of Marcus Voss. She was Claire Morgan, the woman who survived everything thrown at her and still refused to become what others expected. But as Damien's betrayal became public, the entire criminal world started shifting. Old alliances collapsed. Rivals prepared for war. People who had remained silent for years suddenly chose sides. Adrian knew a storm was coming, and this time, the enemy was not trying to take his territory. They were trying to erase his entire legacy. Before disappearing, Damien left one final message for Adrian, a message designed to break the foundation of everything he believed. It contained a secret about Adrian's family that had been hidden for decades. And when Adrian opened the file, he discovered a truth he never expected. The empire he inherited was not built on honor. It was built on a lie. Adrian Whitmore had spent most of his life believing emotions were weaknesses. In his world, hesitation got people hurt. Trust created vulnerabilities. And caring about someone gave enemies a weapon they could use against him. But everything changed when Claire Morgan entered his life. The woman he once viewed as a possible threat became the person he was willing to risk everything to protect. After discovering Damien Cross's betrayal and the hidden lies surrounding his family's empire, Adrian knew the final battle would not be won through fear alone. For years, his enemies expected him to respond with violence. They expected chaos. They expected revenge. Instead, Adrian chose something far more dangerous: strategy. Using the information Claire's father left behind, Adrian began dismantling the enemy's network piece by piece. He exposed hidden alliances, revealed financial corruption, and turned powerful people against each other without firing a single unnecessary shot. He understood something his enemies never considered. The strongest empire was not destroyed from the outside. It collapsed when the truth reached the people holding it together. While Adrian prepared his final move, Claire faced a battle of her own. For years, she had been running from her father's name, running from the mistakes of people before her, running from the fear that everyone would eventually see her as a reflection of someone else. But standing beside Adrian changed her perspective. She realized hiding had protected her once, but it could not protect her forever. Claire was not responsible
for
her
years.
Father's actions.
Adrian Whitmore
She
chose
was responsible
strategy
for the
over
choices
violence.
she made now.
But together
And
with
for
Claire,
the first time in years,
the final battle
she
has
stopped trying to
begun.
disappear. She chose to stand. Adrian and Claire understood each other in a way neither of them expected. Both had been shaped by betrayal. Both had learned to survive by building walls around themselves. Adrian hid behind power. Claire hid behind silence. But together, they discovered that surviving alone was not the same as living. Their connection was no longer based on protection or necessity. It was built on trust. When the enemy finally made their move, they attempted to destroy Adrian publicly. They leaked information, attacked his reputation, and tried to convince the world that his empire was built on corruption. But they did not expect Claire. She stepped forward with the evidence hidden for decades. Documents, records, proof of the betrayal that started everything. The woman who once wanted nothing more than a quiet life became the person who exposed the people who controlled the city from the shadows. The enemy's plan collapsed. But during the final confrontation, Adrian faced a choice. He could secure his empire completely, or he could protect Claire when she became the primary target. For the first time in his life, Adrian chose a person over power. He chose Claire. And that decision changed everything. The war ended. The traitors fell. The truth finally came into the light. But victory did not bring the peace they expected. Because moments after the enemy was defeated, Claire received a message from an unknown number. There was only one sentence written on the screen. Congratulations on exposing the first mastermind, but you still haven't found the person who started it all. Adrian Whitmore thought he had already uncovered the worst truth of his life. He was wrong. The message Claire received was not a warning. It was an invitation. A final piece of evidence left behind by someone who had been controlling events from the shadows for decades. The person Adrian had been searching for was not a rival trying to destroy him, not a forgotten enemy seeking revenge. It was someone who had been close enough to watch his entire empire grow. Someone who understood every decision Adrian made. The mastermind behind the chaos was revealed to be Richard Whitmore, Adrian's own uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents' death, the man Adrian believed had protected his family, the man who taught him how to survive. For years, Adrian believed his parents were victims of a war started by Marcus Voss. But the truth was far more painful. Richard had created the conflict. He manipulated both families against each other because he wanted control over their combined influence. He used Marcus Voss as a distraction, destroyed Adrian's family from within, and then positioned himself as the person Adrian needed most. Every loss Adrian suffered, every enemy he fought, every decision that shaped his rise to power, it had all been influenced by the one person he trusted without question. The revelation broke something inside Adrian. He had spent years fighting enemies, he could see, while ignoring the danger standing beside him. But the truth also changed how he viewed Claire. Her family was not responsible for destroying his life. They were victims of the same person. The war between their names had been a carefully designed illusion. Two families had spent years destroying each other, while the real enemy collected the rewards. Claire finally felt the weight she had carried for years begin to disappear. She was no longer the daughter of an enemy. She was not a reminder of someone else's mistakes. She was simply Claire, a woman who survived betrayal, fear, and loss without allowing darkness to define her. For Adrian, the truth created a different kind of battle. Revenge had always been the force driving him forward. But now he understood something he had never accepted before. Revenge could build an empire, but it could never heal the person underneath it. The man who once trusted nobody began seeing loyalty differently. Strength was not only about controlling others. Sometimes strength was allowing someone to matter, and Claire mattered. But while Adrian prepared to confront the final enemy, Claire made a decision. She had spent too long connected to dangerous people and dangerous secrets. She believed leaving was the only way to give Adrian a chance at peace. Without warning, she began preparing to disappear from his world. No explanations, no goodbye, just a quiet exit. But before she could leave, Adrian discovered something hidden in the final documents. Something Richard had kept secret until the very end. A truth about Claire that changed everything. Because Adrian realized Claire was not just a woman who helped uncover the past. She was the only person who could determine the future of his entire empire. Adrian Whitmore had spent years becoming the man everyone feared. He built an empire where loyalty was demanded, enemies were eliminated, and emotions were considered dangerous weaknesses. But after everything he lost and everything he discovered, Adrian finally understood the truth he had ignored for most of his life. Power could control people. Fear could control enemies. But neither one could create peace. The final confrontation with Richard Whitmore ended the last chapter of the betrayal that had haunted Adrian's family for decades. The truth was revealed, the hidden manipulations were exposed, and the man responsible for destroying two families finally lost control of the empire he tried to steal. For the first time in years, Adrian no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions. The enemy was gone, the lies were exposed, and the war created by someone else's greed was finally over. But the biggest change did not happen outside Adrian's empire. It happened inside him. The man who once believed fear was the only way to maintain control started leading differently. He stopped measuring loyalty by obedience and started recognizing it through trust. His people noticed the difference. Adrian was still powerful, still respected, still dangerous when necessary. But he was no longer controlled by anger and revenge. He became a leader who protected what he built instead of destroying everything around him to prove his strength. Claire Morgan also found her own freedom. For years, she believed her family history was something she had to hide. She thought the Voss name would always define her. But after facing the truth, she finally understood that a person's identity was not created by the mistakes of those who came before them. She created a future that belonged only to her. No more running. No more hiding. No more apologizing for a past she never chose. Claire built a life based on her own decisions, her own dreams, and her own strength. The connection between Adrian and Claire was no longer built on danger or survival. It was built on something much stronger: respect, trust, understanding. Two people who had spent years surrounded by betrayal finally found someone who saw them for who they truly were. Not their names, not their reputations, not their past. Just them. Adrian once believed having everything meant having control over an empire. Now he understood that an empire without someone to share it was just another empty room. The man who had feared losing power more than anything realized that the greatest victory of his life was not defeating his enemies. It was finding someone who made him want to become better. For the first time, Adrian looked toward the future, without expecting another war. But peace never lasted forever in their world. Months later, when Claire believed the secrets were finally buried, a final envelope arrived at her home. No sender, no explanation, only her name written across the front. Inside was a single document and a photograph. Claire stared at the image, feeling the same cold fear she thought she had escaped. Because the final secret inside that envelope proved one terrifying truth: their story was not finished yet.